Welcome to our Projex Academy podcast, where we dive into the science and strategies behind unlocking human potential in the workplace. I'm your host, Dave Litten, and today I'm exploring a topic that's critical for every leader, manager and employee. It's called the science of employee motivation. So, what exactly drives high performance? Now, you might be running a team, building a career, or just be curious about what makes people tick. So this podcast episode will unpack the research and practical insights. These together can help drive exceptional performance. So why does motivation matter in the workplace? Well, motivated employees are more productive, creative and engaged. So that's a good start. And studies have consistently shown that high motivation correlates with better job satisfaction, lower staff turnover, and even improved mental health. But motivation isn't just about cheering people on and handing out bonuses. Instead, it's a complex interplay of psychology, environment, and biology. Because you see, the science of motivation starts with understanding what drives us. At its core, motivation is about why we act or behave in a certain way. It's the spark that gets us out of bed in the morning and the fuel that keeps us pushing through the daily challenges. Now, in the workplace, motivation distinguishes between an employee who just shows up versus one who consistently excels. The science of motivation is therefore the key to consistently getting your employees to bring their A game. So what exactly does the research say? Well, one foundational framework comes from psychologists Edward Deci, I think that's the way you pronounce it, and Richard Ryan, who developed the self-determination theory. And they argue that humans have three core psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And that when these needs are met, we are more likely to be motivated. This means we work because we find the task itself rewarding. We do not just work for external rewards, such as money or promotions. So let's break those core three psychological needs down. Autonomy. Well, this is about having control over your work, having freedom to make decisions and shape exactly how you get things done. Competence is feeling both capable and effective in your role, like you're growing and mastering new skills. Relatedness, on the other hand, is about connection, feeling valued by your team and aligned with a shared purpose. And when these needs are fulfilled, employees don't just do better, they actually thrive. But what about when these needs are missing? Well, you get disengagement, burnout, or worse, people quietly quitting. So let's move on now to the neuroscience of motivation. What happens in our brains when we are motivated? Neuroscience gives us some fascinating clues about what drives high performance. At its heart is a chemical in our brain called dopamine, often nicknamed the feel-good neurotransmitter. Dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's about anticipation and reward. When you set a goal, like finishing a big project, your brain releases dopamine. This happens as you make progress and imagine the reward of completing it. That dopamine keeps you focused and energized. Ever notice how checking off a task on your to-do list feels so satisfying? Just like me creating this podcast. Well, that's your brain rewarding you and me with a little dopamine boost. But dopamine is a double-edged sword. If the reward feels too far away, your brain doesn't get that dopamine hit. If the task feels meaningless, motivation tanks. This is why breaking big goals into smaller achievable milestones is so powerful, because it keeps that all-important dopamine flowing. Another key player in motivation is the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning and decision making, something managers do pretty much every minute of every day. And when you're motivated, this area lights up, so to speak, helping you stay focused and resist distractions. But stress, fatigue, or lack of clarity can shut it down, leaving you feeling lethargic. So, what does all this mean for the workplace? Leaders need to create environments that trigger dopamine and support the prefrontal cortex, just like I've explained. And that means setting clear goals, celebrating small wins, or even designing tasks to feel like a game. What does this mean? Well, in 2019, a study in Frontiers in Psychology provides an example. It found that gamifying, quote unquote, work tasks like adding progress bars or point systems can boost engagement by up to 40%. But it's not just about brain chemistry. External factors like workplace culture and leadership play a huge role too. Let's talk about those, starting with external drivers of motivation. So we've covered the internal wiring, dopamine and prefrontal cortex, and those core psychological needs. But what about the external factors? How do leaders and organizations create an environment where motivation thrives? Well, to get there, let's first talk about feedback. Once again, research from Gallup shows that employees who get regular constructive feedback are 3 more times likely to be engaged. I can remember early on in my career, my manager bought me a book called The 1 Minute Manager, and that pretty much covers what I've just said here. If you get an opportunity, I thoroughly recommend you read it. But it's not just about praising people. Effective feedback is specific, prompt and tied to their goals. Once again, the 1 Minute Manager talks about that type of feedback too. So to be specific, instead of saying great job, try I really appreciated how you streamlined that report. It saved the team hours. That feedback reinforces competence and keeps people motivated. Perhaps it's a case of don't spend too much time looking for what people do wrong so that can be corrected. Instead, look for what they're doing right and make a point of telling them about it promptly. You see, people want to feel like their work matters. Once again, back in 2021, the McKinsey study showed that 70% of employees say their sense of purpose is defined by their work. We can all relate to that. And leaders can tap into this by connecting day-to-day tasks to a bigger mission. For example, if you're a tech company, remind your team about the impact of their coding. It's making life easier for millions of users. That sense of impact is a massive motivator. And let's not forget rewards. While intrinsic motivation is powerful, intrinsic rewards like bonuses, promotions, or even flexible work arrangements still matter. However, if you rely too much on external rewards, you risk undermining intrinsic motivation. A famous study by Desi showed an interesting outcome. Over-reliance on cash bonuses can reduce people's internal drive to do a task. So my advice is to use rewards strategically, not as a crutch. Bringing us to culture. Now, a workplace where people feel psychologically safe is a motivation goldmine. In such a place, individuals can take risks, share ideas, and make mistakes without fear. One of my previous employers often used the phrase ready, fire, aim as a way of encouraging folks to take action. Of course, that meant that when they made mistakes, they didn't get beaten up. It was merely a learning that they could take on. Now, Google's Project Aristotle found that psychological safety is the #1 factor in high-performing teams. So leaders can foster this by modeling vulnerability, encouraging open communication, and celebrating learning over perfection. So let's talk next about some practical tips for leaders and employees. Starting with tips for leaders. Give autonomy where possible. Let employees choose how they tackle projects or set their schedules. Even small choices, like picking which tasks to prioritize, can make a big difference. Another tip for leaders, set clear, achievable goals. Break projects into milestones to keep the dopamine flowing. Tools like OKRs, standing for Objectives and Key Results, can help here. Again, for leaders, foster connection. You do this by having regular team check-ins, one-on-ones, or even virtual coffee chats. All of these can build relatedness and trust. Next up, celebrate progress. Recognize small wins publicly, whether it's an acknowledgement in a meeting or a quick thank you email. Next, invest in growth. Offer training, mentorship, coaching, or stretch assignments to help employees feel competent and challenged. So let's now look at practical tips for employees. Starting with find your why. Think about how your work connects to your personal values or to the organization's mission. Write it down and revisit when motivation dips. As an employee, you can break tasks into chunks. Create your own mini goals to trigger those dopamine hits. And applications like Trello or Notion can help you in visualizing progress. Still on employees? Send feedback. Don't wait for your boss to give it. Ask for specific advice on your work in order to feel more competent. Build relationships. You can connect with colleagues who inspire you. A quick chat or collaboration can boost your sense of relatedness. Manage stress. Protect your prefrontal cortex with good sleep, exercise and mindfulness practices to stay focused and motivated. If, like me, you're not big on exercise per se, make a point on a semi-regular basis of stepping away from your office or from your computer and taking a swift 2-minute walk away from your desk. That can invigorate you during the day. So these strategies don't need a massive overhaul, just small, intentional changes that add up over time. Okay, so what's the way ahead? Well, you and I have explored the psychological needs of autonomy, competence and relatedness. We've also looked at the neuroscience of dopamine and the prefrontal cortex. Finally, we covered practical strategies for creating a workplace where high performance thrives. So what's the big takeaway? It's this. Motivation isn't about quick fixes or one-size-fits-all solutions. It's more about understanding what makes people tick and building environments that bring out the best in them. So whether you're leading a team or navigating your own career, small changes rooted in science can lead to big results. Okay, so that's all for today. And so until we meet up again, from me, Dave Litten, it's bye for now.